All right, this video talks more about modulation techniques besides what we learned in the other video about common chord as pivots. This video, though, is still not all of the techniques that you can use for modulation. There are other ways that you can modulate too, but we will see quite a few techniques in this one. Okay, and there we go. Okay, so the first one we'll see is a pivot chord, but unlike the other video in which you saw common chord pivots, this one has a chromatic pivot. Okay, so in this example, the chord is chromatic in our old key of G, okay, but it is diatonic in our new one. Okay, so you could see it like diatonic in the old and chromatic in the new, or you could have both of them be chromatic. Okay, any of those are possible for pivot chords. Okay. All right, so Beethoven. So we're starting in G, modulating to D major, which is just the dominant. So I could have done it easier, but it's Beethoven, right? So, okay. Anyway, and yeah, from there, it does stay in D major, okay? So once you see this C sharp right here, yeah, it's gonna be consistent, okay? All right, so the reason why we didn't try and use this one, right? Because most of the time, if we saw a 5, 6, 5 chord right here, right, then we might think, oh, well, then let's back up, right? This is our dominant, so let's back up and use this chord to modulate, right? And you would think that would make sense, right? But look at this chord. It's A minor, which only makes sense in our old key, right? A minor makes 0 sense here, right? If we're in the key of D, A should be major. It should be a major 5 chord, right? Not a minor 5. Okay, that would be unusual. It's not impossible, but you don't see that kind of thing until the very, very, very end of the late Romantic period and in Impressionism. So like music by Debussy, for instance. He would often use a minor 5. Beethoven does not, okay? So yeah, that's why we're modulating here, okay, instead of here, okay? This chord doesn't make sense in our new key of D, okay? But yeah, this one, since it is built on, right, it's built on our 2 chord, right? But now it's a major minor sounding chord because we have A, C sharp, E plus G up here, right? So we had to label it as a secondary dominant. So 5, 6, 5 of 5. Okay, next technique, okay? So we can see what's called a sequential modulation. So remember, a sequence is just an idea that's stated at one pitch level and then it's restated on another pitch, okay? So a sequential modulation means that your phrase is stated in one key and then it's stated again in a different key, okay? So each phrase is tonicizing a different key, so a different tonal center for each, okay? Sometimes these sequential modulations are really small, so you could use that little like fraction sign or bracket like we've seen before. That's called expanded tonicization, right? So in this example, right, they could have also done this. Where is my line tool? There we go. I'll just draw. So they could have also done like a little bracket theme here, right? And just said that all of this is in the 2 key, right, of D, basically, okay? Depending on what comes next, right? I don't think it stays in D. I think it goes back, but I don't remember off the top of my head, so. But yeah, you could also see this expanded tonicization instead of like an actual modulation right here. So you'll see with a sequential modulation, there's a pretty clear ending right here. It's a half cadence, right? And there's no attempt to like bridge the gap between the 2 keys. So there's not a pivot, okay? There's not a little bracket theme with chords that are shared between, okay? Even though C major and D minor do share chords, right? So you could like have put a little bracket right here, right? And said, oh, well, this is C, right? And this is a 2 chord. But then, look at this. Does a 5 chord go to a 2? No, right? It doesn't make any sense, right? And remember, whenever we're trying to analyze music, we're trying to make sense of it, right? And this analysis doesn't make any sense, right? So it's not actually showing us what's happening, okay? What's really happening is that this phrase right here ends, right? And then we do the same phrase, but in a different key, okay? So here's what it sounds like. sound, but in D minor, okay? All right, so some more examples of a sequential modulation. Okay, this is from Grieg. So this whole first line is going to be in B minor, and then he does the same thing in F sharp minor. So. And then F sharp. Sorry, I can't reach. Okay. All right, so hopefully you heard the same ideas, really, and just in different keys, okay? And again, if we had tried to put in a little bracket theme, we definitely could have. It would not be right here, though, right? Because F sharp in B minor, F sharp should be like a major triad, right? Should be the major 5. So we would have to modulate over here, right? That's not really going to show us what happens if we do it like that. So that would be like a 1 chord in our old key, and in our new key, B minor is our 4, right? So I mean, like the chord progression and everything makes sense, but that doesn't really show us what's happening. So just having these 2 different tonal centers without a bracket kind of shows us, oh, yeah, there's not really an attempt to like bridge the gap, right? We're just repeating that same stuff, okay? So same chords, same melody, same everything, okay? All right, here's another example, okay? This one would be even more impossible to try and bridge the gap. He makes no attempt at it, okay? So this one's starting in C major and then going to B flat. The other ones so far haven't sounded too crazy, right? So the very first one was C major, and then it went to D minor, which would be close together on the circle of fifths, right? D minor is just 1 flat more than C major, okay? So that's not weird. The previous one went from B minor to F sharp minor, so just 1 sharp more, right? They're next together on the circle of fifths. It's closely related, okay? Not too crazy. Okay, this one's going to go from C major to B flat major. That's 2 flats away. That's not as close, okay? It's going to sound farther away, okay? But it is, again, sequential. So here's this example. So. B flat. It doesn't stay in B flat though, okay? That would be crazy, right? Okay, so we start in C. We can't use this though to like pivot, right? This is the 5 chord in C, right? It's G major. That makes no sense whatsoever in B flat major, okay? Yeah, it makes really no sense, okay? And it also wouldn't show us what he's really doing, right? He's just using this same stuff right here, but then putting it in B flat, okay? It's the same exact stuff, okay? All right, I think I have one more. Okay, this one is fun because of the way that he modulates, okay? This is, again, sequential, okay? So you'll see we start out in C. This one's gonna sound potentially more crazy than the other one, just because this one's even farther away, okay? So if you think of where C is on the circle of fifths, E flat is 3 flats away, right? E flat major, okay? And then we go to G flat, which is also 3 flats away, okay? And then it goes to B minor, which is not close at all to G flat if you're thinking circle of fifths, okay? And then we go to C, which is 2 sharps away from B minor, right? But that is the key that we start out in. We're going to look at this next, but he's doing what we call chromatic mediant, okay? So mediant is just something that's a third away, right? Chromatic, though, means that we have to use an accidental to get there, okay? So if we were doing C and going up a third, we'd be on E, right? This E flat, then, is an accidental, right, compared to where we were, right? So E flat is what we call a chromatic mediant, okay? It is a third away, but not diatonically a third away from C major, right? E would have been, so just E natural, like E minor, right? That would be the normal 3 chord here. That would be the mediant, right? So this one is a chromatic mediant away, okay? The reason that it's going to work out is these chromatic mediants share a note in common, okay? So it's not completely like crazy. For instance, if I played like B major next to C major, they don't have any of the same notes. You can tell, yeah, those sound pretty far removed, right? Versus when I play C major and E flat, those somehow don't sound so far away, right? It's because they share a note. So look at this G, right? That G is in common between those two, okay? So all chromatic medians will share one note, okay? If you look from E flat to G flat, the note we share in this one is that B flat, okay? So this B flat right here, right? There's a B flat right here. That's what gets shared, okay? Yes. Okay, and then G flat, let's see, right here to B, you have to think enharmonically, okay? So G flat enharmonically is F sharp, okay? And enharmonically G flat is a third away from B. Here's what it sounds like on the piano, okay? So you might think, oh yeah, that doesn't really sound it, but yeah, it's kind of like a third, but augmented third. Anyway, it's fine. So this is how he's getting away with all of it. All of these chords actually share a note, but it is going to sound kind of crazy still. Okay, so sequential modulations. And again, notice there's no attempt at bridging the gap, right? There's nothing in common anyway between the two, right? And it's not going to show you what's actually happening too. And then if you compare 1, 5, 1, 6, 5, 1, it's the same exact progression in each key, right? Right here it's truncated, so it's shortened so that he can get back to C. So. It sounds kind of crazy, right? But Schubert loves doing sequential modulations. You could find lots of examples of that in Schubert. Okay, next, the previous one leads right into this one, okay? So modulation by common tone. So the previous example did have common tones between our different tonal centers, right? With those chords that he was using, okay? So this one kind of like a common chord modulation, right? That means that we have something in common between the two. In this case, it's just one single note, so common tone. So tone only one, okay? Most of the time, these kinds of modulations have that chromatic mediant relationship, like what we were talking about with that Schubert example, okay? So the roots of the chords are usually a major or minor third apart, okay? That's the mediant part, okay? But it's going to be not diatonic, right? So like a chromatic third apart, okay? So usually the two keys are either going to be like major and major, right? So like we saw C major and E flat major and G flat. We didn't go to C major and then E flat minor, right? Because E flat minor wouldn't have a common tone, okay? It wouldn't have G anymore, it would have G flat. Okay, so with that, we were talking about, right, all of those keys were not closely related on like the circle of fifths, right? So that's what we see in these modulation by common tones. They're not closely related keys, but we're getting away with it because we share a note in common. So it's actually pretty easy to get there. Okay, so this one is showing us a modulation, which is technically actually going from an F sharp major triad to D major, okay? So if you're just thinking, it's technically in B minor right here, right? But if you're looking at just this chord, we're taking the fifth of that chord, so the F sharp, right? So the fifth in this key of B, right? And we're changing it, we're holding it, and it's the 3 in our new one. So notice the little like carrot top themes, right? That is denoting that it's a scale degree, okay? So we're not using Roman numerals. We're just using the scale degree numbers to modulate, or to show that modulation by common tone, okay? All right, here's what it sounds like. Smooth, right? Because that F sharp is diatonic in both keys, right? It's there for B minor, it's there for D. It's just the fifth of the scale for B minor. It's the third of the scale, it's the third scale degree for D, okay? All right, here's another example, okay? This is an example from Beethoven. Okay, I have to think about what that ledger line is, okay. So on and so forth. Okay, so the note we're using in common, okay, is this E flat right here, okay. We're gonna kind of cross some things out. You don't really need to think of it like this, okay. This doesn't make sense, right? A 3 chord can't go to a 5/7 chord, okay. So they're showing you like what the common chord would be to kind of show you that's not really what's happening, right? Because that progression makes 0 sense, okay? So really what's happening is that we're pivoting right here, okay? So that E flat in our old key of C minor, right? That's just, oh, sorry, not that kind of one. We need a 3, okay. Okay, so in our old key, it's just our third scale degree. Let me put in a little like carrot top. There we go. Okay, pretended that it's all in, well, I guess we could change it, huh? It's fine. Okay, in our new key of A flat, right? So A flat, that is the 5th scale degree, right? And we could put in this little like carrot top thing. That was not as good as my other one, okay. And that's showing you what's really happening, right? We're using that single note to pivot between those 2 keys, okay? And oftentimes it looks like this, where it's held out, okay? That's strategic, so that you can hear just that note and it kind of clears the previous key, right? So that you can make that transition into the new key without it feeling too like forced or sudden, okay? Yeah, this space right here was also very strategic, okay? So if you were playing this, you would want to make sure that you didn't cheat any of this, right? It's very much on purpose to make that modulation actually make sense, okay? Okay, I'm gonna clear that before we go to our next one. Okay, this is a monophonic modulation, okay? Monophony just means one voice, right? So we're using just one line of music to modulate, okay? Which is what you would see in sight singing, right? In your sight singing book, that's what it's going to do, is it's just going to modulate using that one voice, okay? So this one is switching from D minor to G minor, so it's going counterclockwise on the circle of fifths, right? Because instead of going to our dominant, we're going to our subdominant, okay? All right, so it starts out in D. So we can tell that it's in G minor now because of all of these F sharps, right? Plus we've got an E flat too, right? Which is sometimes canceled out, right? Because he's imitating G major, and then, surprise, that B flat puts us back in G minor, right? Okay, so this is just if you have like one line of music, or potentially if you have multiple lines but all playing the same notes, right? That's still technically monophony, right? Even if you're just doubling notes, okay? All right, next next one, this is a direct modulation, also sometimes called a phrase modulation, okay? Because that just shows you like where it's going to happen, okay? You're not going to have a direct modulation in the middle of a phrase, okay? It's going to be between phrases. So like one phrase might end in one key, and the next phrase might just start in a new key, okay? With no attempt to bridge the gap between the keys, okay? So there's not going to be common chords or tones or sequences or anything like that, okay? So here's an example, okay? So this is an example from Bach, okay? And you can tell he definitely is ending in G minor because of this F sharp, right? This is a half cadence, right? And you'll hear it. Sounds like he should go to 1, right? And he doesn't, okay? So instead, we start out in B flat and it stays there. Okay, so here's what it sounds like, except I can't reach all the notes. Okay, so. So there's our half cadence, and then. And it's all just in B flat, okay? So there's not, and you can tell too, this would be direct slash phrase, right? Because there's that phrase, right? And then the new phrase is just in the new key, okay? Okay, there's another one, okay? So this one I think is even more startling, okay? Which sort of makes sense because, no, go back, okay. This is an example from Brahms, okay? So he's dealing with a different kind of harmonic language than Bach is, okay? So this one's going to be even more surprising because he's going further away, okay? We're starting out in C major, and then we're gonna go to E flat major, which is a chromatic mediant away, right? But there's no common tone, right? I guess there technically is this G, right? But it's not held over, right? He just, and that sforzando, right, is really going to tell you like, bam, new key, right? Okay. Startling too, I think, because even the rhythm changes, right? So instead of doing like subdivisions in duple, right? So like da 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 da, he does triplet, triplet, then triplet, and then triplet, triplet. Anyway, okay. So yeah, there's not really an attempt to bridge the gap, right? There was a half cadence, which we assume would go back to C major, right? So we had this, right, and then. E flat out of really nowhere. Okay, now you can match, okay? So go ahead and pause the video and figure out which one goes with which. All right, and if you're watching, I'm gonna assume that you figured out which one is which. So number 1, a type of modulation using the same pattern but in a different key is a sequential modulation, okay? Number 2, a modulation using a chord diatonic to both keys. This was a callback to the previous video that you would have watched. So this is a common chord or pivot modulation, okay? Number 3, an abrupt modulation, so there's no transitional process, is a phrase or direct modulation, okay? Then the last one, number 4, a modulation using a chord that is not diatonic to both keys. It's a chromatic pivot chord, okay? Sometimes altered too, okay? All right, now we get to practice, okay? All right, this one goes on to the next slide too, so I might have to take a teensy bit of a pause just to go to my next slide, okay? All right, so here's this example from Schubert's. If you look at the key signature, it really did help you out, okay? And we did start with the tonic chord. Okay. We're in D flat major, okay? And if you had any doubt, this is the 5-7 in our key, right? So A flat, C, E flat, G flat. So 5-6-5, and then it went back to a 1, okay? All right, and we stayed in D flat up until here. So if you look right here, there's a funny thing that happened, right? So I played this. This note is it's the same exact note, right? Okay, so hopefully that kind of clued you in on what's happening, okay? It's the same exact note, but rewritten because our new key is A major, right? And D flat major and A major are really not closely related at all, right? Okay, so what's happening here? Hopefully you've realized by now that this is a common tone modulation. So it does use a bracket, right? But numbers, right? So our old key of D flat, right? We'll use this. Okay, in our old key, that D flat / C sharp, right, is just our first scale degree, okay? In our new key of A, that D flat is the same thing as C sharp, right, which is our third scale degree. And notice he kind of does the same, like, you know, he holds it out. In this case, he repeats it, right? But that's strategic so that you can kind of get rid of some of the previous chord sound, right? And set up your ear for this switch, which is still sort of surprising. And notice the dynamic that he puts on there, right? Forte piano, right? He's not trying to hide the fact that he's going to a completely unrelated key, okay? If anything, he's probably quite proud of himself for figuring out a way to go between such unrelated keys. Okay. All right. This one is a full score from a Mozart symphony. So I'm going to just kind of show you what's happening on this page, okay? And then the next page is the new key, okay? All right. So if you look through here, especially looking, you could look at either part, but if you take, for instance, like the cello plus like the oboe part, right? We've got this chord, and then it does this chord, and then it does this, and then this, and then it does this, okay? Hopefully you can hear, it's just 1 5 1 5 1 5 1, right? And it's all in G major, okay? Hopefully that made sense, okay? So so that G was what we ended on, right? And then you can see right here, especially if you look down at the cello part, so right? And here's that chord, right? This chord right here in our fourth complete measure, that's a 5-7 chord. That's what really tells us that we're going to E flat, okay? So we're starting out in G, we switch to E flat. This stuff right here is how we get between the key. So it's doing what it uses to modulate. So what is he doing? Okay, hopefully you figured it out. This is, even though it might not look like it, this is a monophonic modulation, okay? It's really monophonic because, remember, this is really only just G's, okay? It's one note, okay? And he does that one note, and then switches it to an F natural so that that one fits in our key of E flat, okay? Okay, so this whole thing basically transitions us into E flat, okay? So it still counts as monophony, right? Because there's only one single note, okay? Even though it is doubled up. So you might have been slightly confused, okay? I can see why. Okay. This one, if you look at the fermatas, might give it away, okay? All right, here's this Bach example. Take a second if you need it. Here's the analysis. So we're starting out in G, right? And hopefully you heard a cadence on G. This is an imperfect authentic cadence, okay? And then after, It just switched to A minor kind of abruptly, right? Rather abruptly. So this was a phrase modulation or direct modulation. They mean the same exact thing, okay? And you can see like this phrase is all in G, right? And then this phrase is all just in A minor. Okay, sorry, my chords didn't quite line up right there, but yeah, it's 5-1 at the end. So we've got perfect authentic cadence at the end part. And there's not an attempt to bridge the gap, right? G major makes 0 sense in A, right? It'd be like the major 7 on Te, right? It doesn't really make sense, okay? But this 5-7 chord doesn't make any sense in G either. It's an A7 chord. It would be the 5 of 5, but doesn't go to like a major 5 in G, right? So this one, there's no links between, just switches keys, okay? All right, and I think that is it for this video. Like I said, there are other ways to modulate, but you will learn more about that in Musicianship 3 at this point, or in other videos. So that's it for this one though.